As a kid, I thought going to prison was a badge of honor. So I was like, I gotta go to prison so that I can become a man now, a real man. The streets were our rite of passage. It was the gauntlet you go through to become a man. So I didn't know another pathway toward manhood or masculinity. And it takes a moment to get a person out of slavery, but it takes a lifetime to get the slavery out of person.
There are some conversations that we feel we're not allowed to have. Most Christians can't be seen to have moments when they lose control or even struggle. In these moments, you need someone to go into the deep end with you. Nuance is something you can only find if you're willing to go deeper, and those who are willing are often misunderstood by those who aren't. This is The Deep End with Lecrae.
I mean, it's the environment that I grew up in, you know, and the men that I had in my life, you know, the streets were our rite of passage. It was the gauntlet you go through to become a man. So I didn't know another pathway toward manhood or masculinity. I didn't grow up with doctors and lawyers. I didn't even know we could become those things. I grew up seeing my uncles, my cousins, the guys in the neighborhood, and the people who I was most influenced by were gangsters, were gang members, were, you know, drug dealers. And so to be like them meant to be a man. And I was probably in my early 30s before I realized, like, this is dumb, you know, but it still was such an intrinsic aspect of my you know, formative years. It took a while to shake it off. You know, they say, you'll be what you see. You'll become what you beheld. That's what I saw. And that's what I desire to become. And it takes a moment to get a person out of slavery, but it takes a lifetime to get the slavery out of person. So it was a process of me, like, detaching myself from those realities and those ideologies. People don't like the concept of privilege or the concept of nepotism, or like, they don't like that concept. But the reality is, it's all throughout our history. It just is what it is. It's like, hey, if your dad is a billionaire, you're by and large going to inherit billions of dollars and become a billionaire. And that's not like, it's just the reality. And so in the same regard, if your mom was a drug addict, your dad was in and out of jail, the chances are that brokenness is going to lead you toward a life of being a degenerate. It doesn't mean that's the rule, but to not follow that path is the exception most of the time. And I think people just fail to see that as a reality. We all think that we live on this equal playing field and everybody is, you know, has the same opportunities and will get through it. And I know that's not true. And the reason why I know it's not true is because I experienced it as a kid, going to hood schools and then getting a chance to go to a suburban school in my last couple years of high school. I know it's not true, right? The stuff that, like, my middle school was on, I believe it was Dateline, for one of the worst schools in America. My mom said, if I see you on here, I'm gonna light you up. But I remember being in class, man, we didn't have to do anything. We didn't learn anything. We just ran amok, right? I remember it, like, distinctly. And then I remember struggling when I got to this high school because I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't prepared. No one taught us this. There was no debate teams and no studying, you know, different languages. It was night and day. So, you know, our experiences and what we're exposed to do in many ways shape us and shape the opportunities that we're given. I'll never forget, I moved to Memphis. I was living in a neighborhood called Binghampton. It was a really tough neighborhood. And I was doing a Bible Institute, and some of the leaders in the Bible Institute said, hey, we're going to do this mission trip. And one of the leaders of the mission trip was a part of this Methodist church, and he invited some people over to his house, you know, middle-aged white guy. And so we go to his house, this nice house in the suburbs. You know, I'm coming out of the hood, the home that, you know, we lived in. And he's taking his sons. And I thought I was so intriguing, you know, as a young guy myself. I saw his sons who were teenagers in high school, you know, a couple, you know, pretty upper middle class white kids. And I said, hey, what's going on, man? We just sparked the conversation. And I was just curious. I hadn't had much interaction with, you know, white kids, you know what I mean? Like I had a little bit, but not like extensive. So I was just curious. I was like, hey man, like, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And he was like, I'll probably be a doctor like my dad. I remember, not literally, but it felt like my head just fell off my neck because I could not fathom being 16 years old and thinking I could be a doctor. Like the quickness and the confidence he said that with baffled me, that was his reality. Like I thought in my mind, man, that's gotta be the hardest. You're gonna have to work so hard. Like who would ever strive for that? That's just crazy. That could never be a reality. And the quickness and candor he said it with blew my mind because I just had never experienced that. And I knew then that his values were my ideals. And that's what society does a lot of times, is sometimes your values are other people's ideals. It's like, nah, it's just something I value. I value a budget. Some people are like, oh man, that's the ideal if I could budget my money, but man. But that's just the reality that we live in. As a black man in America, you know, there's no one way to be black, right? I think we're not a homogenous people group. It's like, oh, this is the way you're black, you know? White people in America are a combination of lots of things. They're a combination of Irish or Italian or Norwegian. And so if they were to go back to their countries of origin, they would, you know, they'd see like, oh, there's different iterations of me being white. And of course, white and black are just constructs that we've created. They're not like real things. They're constructs. But American culture, I mean, what is there, like 300 million people in America? 40 million of them are African American. So I'd say at least 100 million to 150 to 200 million of them are probably white Americans. A culture has been created by the dominant or the majority culture. And that's what happens when there is a dominant or majority culture. And so because of that, you know, the dominant culture will tend to think, oh, this is just how you act. When the minority cultures will say, no, that's how y'all act. But there's not a recognition that, oh, this is a culture. This isn't just America. Like, no, that's your iteration of America, your expression of American. And so you say, yeah, America, what's America? Apple pie, baseball, you know, hot dog. No, that's your expression of America. You ask a African American, what's America? Or what's your iteration or your expression? Well, when I travel overseas, what am I missing? I'm missing soul food. I'm missing hip hop culture. You know, there's certain aspects that are unique to the African American experience. And so oftentimes, because, you know, white Americans are the dominant ethnic group or cultural group, they don't realize that people are assimilating to fit in amongst them. They don't realize that this is not how your Indian friend talks when he gets home. This is not how your black friend talks when he gets home. This is not how your Asian friend talks when they get home. This is them assimilating to fit into the broader culture. And so, you know, what made me stop doing that was when I got to Atlanta and I saw beautiful expressions of African American culture in different iterations. Atlanta has every kind of black person: punk rock, hip hop, intellectual, like whatever, you know, every kind of expression of black American. Whereas in some cities I lived, you were either assimilated or hood. It was just one or the other. And so in order to not be mistaken or thought of as like, oh, you're a hood degenerate, people assimilate. and dress like the white people dress and talk like the white people talk in order to be accepted. And in Atlanta, you can just be yourself as a black person. I don't feel like I want to wear a hat and a chain and no one's like, he's a gangster, he's a thug. They don't know. Or they're not like, he's an athlete, right? Which is what people would think if I were to go to, maybe the middle of Iowa is like rapper, athlete, gangster, I don't know. But in Atlanta, I have no idea who this guy is. I have no idea. And I think that's the beautiful thing about authenticity is being able to be your full self and to show up as your full self and not have to feel like I have to assimilate to be accepted. Because you don't really see, you don't see white people, changing the way they dress when they show up to a black event. You don't see that, but will see black people do that. You will see black people change the way they dress. You don't see white people like, oh, shoot, I'm going to hang out with my Hispanic friends. Let me develop a more Hispanic lingo. You know what I mean? Like, if anything, there may be like a condescending, what up, dog? You know what I'm saying? Or like, hola, amigos. And then that's it. But yeah, minorities are constantly learning how to assimilate. And that's actually a superpower for us because we know the dominant culture movies, the dominant culture music, but they don't know the minority culture things, right? Except for the things that kind of get popularized and embraced by dominant culture. So yeah, I know Shawshank Redemption and I know Top Gun and I know, Taylor Swift, but do you know Mo Better Blues? Do you know Glory or Roots? It's like, those are some old school joints. But, do you know Frankie Beverly and Maze? The staples in black barbecue culture. And so that's just a reality of life that I've learned to navigate. I'll never forget this guy when I was in college. He was a Christian white guy from Kentucky, and he was so adamant about being a part of the African-American ministry as a leader. And, he knew his Bible. So they were like, you want to be minister to African-Americans on campus? Shoot your shot. And they let him come around. And what was so dope about him was he didn't just come in like with the Messiah complex, like, I know Bible that you don't know, let me teach you. He came in like trying to serve and acted like a real missionary would. I'll never forget him asking me like, what movies you grew up on? What music did you grow up on? And I told him, and he went and listened to it all and watched it all. And then just would dialogue with me about it and find ways to connect those narratives to the Bible. And I was blown away by that. Here's the thing you got to realize too, what a lot of people don't realize is like, minority cultures, specifically like the black community, we are very community oriented. So we tend to think in terms of the collective. Whereas like my white friends think in terms of the individual. So my white friends will go to a restaurant and there may be a white guy in there and he's loud and obnoxious and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that guy's so loud and obnoxious. What an idiot. But as black people, if we go to a restaurant and there's a black person in there acting up, we like, man, you embarrassing us. It's a collective mindset because we think communally, not individually. And so for us, it's like, if I got it, you got it. If I'm hungry, you hungry. And you see that in minority communities. You see like the Asian communities where it's like, hey, no, we're going to live together. We're going to own this collectively. So there's just different iterations of it. Whereas I feel like that's what God really desires. I think that's what, we can learn from a lot of Eastern cultures in the West is that intercultural, that cultural, that dependency. That community dependency upon one another and not rugged individualism. Not like, and for us, the more money we get, the more influence we get, the further away we want to be from people. I want a house on a hill with a big gate, with a lake around it, so I don't have to deal with people at all. And the reality is, those are the most miserable people. The happiest people live in close proximity with folks and they have block parties and they know each other and they're hanging out. And so, that is one of the beauties. Again, it's why we're a body. We need to learn from each other instead of like thinking like one particular group has all the answers and one denomination has all the answers, just on and on and on. There's so much we can learn from one another. And that's one of the things I love about like Eastern cultures and communities and, cultures and communities below the equator there's a real sense of community and not like isolation and individualism.
People are saying, I want to hear the prostitution story.
Oh, yeah. I said, if you want to go there, I can go there, and I got story after story and there's different places I can go. And yeah, I brought up prostitution because again, it's healing and something that I can talk about. So I'm going to refrain from naming names, but I'm going to give you all some detail. I'll give you a couple stories, but I'll try to condense it. I used to have this really close friend, man, and we were like, we were thick as thieves. His uncle had done a lot of time in prison, and he'd gotten out of prison and, used to haunt the strip club. And he would get drunk and be in the strip club all the time. And so we would go and pick him up from the strip club as, 18, 19-year-olds. And so in picking him up from the strip club, you just frequent it so much, it's not like appealing to you anymore. You start knowing the strippers and just like talking to them, and you know them as like, that's just Teresa. You know what I mean? So it's not the same like allure. The dark backstories, the pimps, and you just get in more immersed in the underworld of it and less enamored with it. And so, man, me and my friend would just, find ourselves in these sketchy places and just dealing with all kinds of characters. And, you end up with friends who are strippers and who are prostitutes. And, these people become like, it becomes a normal reality. So, at one season iteration of my life, I'm dating a girl who works in a strip club. And man, we're talking and I'm just getting a download. So for me, I felt like I had insight on her backstory and what put her in the position she was in and some of her personal struggles and some of her own traumas. And I found myself like really starting to feel like this was so normal that it wasn't a bad thing, that I'm connected with pimps and strippers and prostitutes. And this is just the circle. And the problem is it's like olfactory fatigue. It's when if you live around a smell so long, you don't smell it anymore. So it's like I'm around all of this chaos and trauma that it didn't look bad to me. It just seemed normal. And I remember one night, and this is, I don't even think my mama know this story, but it's all good because I've learned and I've grown from it. God is good. But one particular night, man, we had left one strip club and my friend had hooked up with, this young lady who was a prostitute. And he was like, man, you just gonna sit here? She got a friend. And I was like, you know what? Why not? Now, I had definitely had a one night stand before. I had definitely put myself in positions where, it was objectifying a woman. But I don't think my body was willing to shun the reality of the trauma that I was introducing it to. And so I go into this hotel room with this young lady and we're talking, and eventually she's like, all right, let's get it going. And I'm like, I can't. Like, I cannot. And she's like, what's wrong with you? You got a girlfriend or something? Like, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. It was weird. But what I know now through therapy, what I know now through so much is, man, you're talking to a guy who had been molested. You're talking to a guy who used promiscuity as a badge to cover up trauma and abandonment, as a way to find a sense of love and care. And here I was in a situation where it was like, man, I'm not only objectifying you, but like you embrace it, right? You're not healthy either. You're in a dark place, and here we are, just two people swimming in trauma, and I cannot. I see you as more than that, even though I don't want to acknowledge that in this moment, because the olfactory fatigue is saying, nah, this is just old girl. This is just a moment. This is just a thing. And man, porn stars, prostitutes, they all have to do some kind of separation of what they're doing and their reality in order to go through with it on a regular basis. You see it happen all the time. They got to take drugs. They got to create an alter ego, on and on and on. And for me in that moment, my body knew something my brain didn't even know. I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what's going on. But my body was like, there's a book, The Body Keeps the Score. My body was like, this is traumatic. This is trauma. We cannot participate. And, it was weird. It was embarrassing. You know what I'm saying? It's like, who does that? Who like has this opportunity and is like, nah, I can't go through with it. And it haunted me. It haunted me for some time because I didn't know what to make of it. Obviously, you're a young dude. You're like 18, 19 years old. And you're like, why am I having issues, with my manhood? So obviously the immature side of me is thinking like, man, I'm less of a man, or on and on. But the other side of me was haunted because it was like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? What does this all mean? And now as I look back on it, I realize, that was a young woman who experienced a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, and put herself in a situation, in a circumstance to use her body as a means of profit and gain, who didn't see her body as valuable as it was. And here I was, like co-signing that, tipping my hat to it, saying, yes, that's absolutely right. You are nothing more than, someone to be objectified, and your body is just that. It's like something I could put a quarter in and get what I want and leave. And so my heart goes out to, anyone who thinks less of themselves, who struggle. There's some people out there some ladies out there who are like, man, this is how I pay my bills, and I gotta create this separation in order to survive. My heart goes out to young women like that, because there's been some experiences that have lied to them. There's been some circumstances that have told them that they are only as valuable as their body will allow them to accumulate. It's like, I want to earn it with my wealth. You hear it in the music. You hear women objectifying themselves because they're like, oh, this sells and this is what's going to give me money. You see it in relationships. And then as a Christian, I believe they are valuable. I believe, Paul said your body's a temple. And in the Bible, a temple is a holy, incredible place that only the priest is allowed to go in. And if the priest wasn't right, he would die once he entered. He had to make amends and atone for his sin before he could enter there. So it took a special person to enter that temple. Anyone couldn't enter. And I always want to remind my daughter, your body's a temple. Don't let anybody just enter there. A priest that place is reserved for a priest. And that's why when you're married, that is your priest. That is that's a holy, sacred moment where now someone is made right and able to enter into the temple of God, quote unquote, but able to enter into your temple, and it's legit, and to take it a step further, in ancient times, those temples, were filled with prostitutes because they felt as if some kind of way this was symbolic of, it was a form of worship. But that's how Satan twists things, because it is actually a form of worship, but it's a form of worshiping the one true God for what he's joined together, not the worship of self or senses or money or fertility, which is what people used it for. So all that to say, man, there's I've learned a lot in my seasons, in my time, and that prostitution story that people were hungering for probably is not as salacious as they like it to be, but it demonstrates that, man, we're whole. That people are valuable. It demonstrates that people have worth and we're more than our bodies.
Is it ever hard for your wife to know that you've got stories?
My wife is one of the most gracious people I know. You know, if there's ever a personification of grace and love, it's her. You know, she has been able to see me as a new person, see me in much the same way that the Lord sees me, and not as damaged goods. You know, she's been able to see God redeem somebody and transform somebody, and she's been able to embrace that, you know, and not look at me as my past. You know, it's obviously not something that we just gonna sit around and talk about. Like, hey, let's talk about my wild years. But it is, she does know my story and my history. You know, she sat with me when we first started dating, or when we got serious. And I remember, you know, saying, like, going through my stuff and feeling this conviction, or I don't know if it was a conversation we had or a conversation that I had or a conviction I came to, but I remember us being together and me getting rid of pictures of old girlfriends, you know, and kind of like, I don't know if they were trophies in some kind of way for me, but it was like, man, let me go through this album and just like, yo, I don't need these no more because this is it. I'm done. But there was one picture of the young lady who I had gotten pregnant and had coerced into getting an abortion, and I struggled with throwing that picture away because I just felt like, man, you know, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame surrounding this. And I remember I just broke down crying in front of her, and I got rid of that picture. Not because I was saying, you know, I'm done with these thoughts and these memories, but because I was saying, in some ways, this is me not forgiving myself, me not embracing that God has forgiven me. And by me holding on to that, it was kind of like I just needed to continue looking at it to as some form of self-condemnation, as some form of punishment for what I had done. And she was just so supportive, man. And she was so loving and gracious to me during that time period. And she's continued to be. You know, I do not deserve her at all. But I'm grateful for her, man. And, you know, we thrive because of the authenticity and the honesty. That's what makes us who we are. Yeah, what are we most afraid of in being vulnerable? We're most afraid of loss. And so me being vulnerable and talking to my wife about my struggles or my issues or my shortcomings or my failures, there's the fear of loss, right? There's a fear that, man, the person I love the most is going to reject me. And, you know, I mean, there's some of us out here who have to face that reality. Like, if you are confessing to infidelity or you're confessing to a murder or some, you know, you got some bodies buried, like, yeah, I mean, that's a reality that you are putting yourself in a position to lose somebody. But at the same time, I think it's selfless to say, man, I love you enough to not have a secret life. I love you and value enough to not hide something from you. And I'm willing to risk it all, not in a selfish way because I need to relieve myself of this guilt or this shame, but more in a selfless way of saying, you deserve to know the truth, right? You know, you hear people say all the time, I don't want to know, I don't want to know. But the truth of the matter is they just want to protect themselves from hurt. But they need to know if that's the type of person that they're with. They need to know if you haven't healed from these particular things because you need healing, you know, and then they can move forward. If a woman shows up in counseling and says, my husband's cheated on me and, you know, should I divorce him or should I stay? Well, to me, that's not a question of right or wrong for staying or leaving. It's a question of, is it wise? Right? Is this wise? Is this a man who has, done this heinous act and is willing to do anything and everything to rectify, to become the healthier version of himself? Is he by and large been consistent, and this is something that's like, what the heck is going on? Well, maybe it's wise. Maybe it's wise to reconcile and to stay through that. And I would not condemn a woman or a man for saying, nah, I'm gonna stick that out. But maybe this is a person who hasn't grown, who hasn't shown the character or the type of person who would put themselves in a place to be vulnerable in the future, to be honest, to be transparent, to get help. No, I would say it wouldn't be wise to stay. And I'm not mad at you for leaving either. And so, at the end of the day, your decisions, you got to live with the consequences of some of those decisions, right? When you hurt people and when you're honest and you're transparent, but you're still not defined by their rejection of you. That is a moment that cost you something. That does not define you. That's not who you are. You're not the person who, got left because of your failure. You're not your failures. Guilt says, I have failed. Shame says, I am a failure. But Jesus says, I've forgiven your failures. So you're gonna have to move forward. You don't just stick your head in a hole and live in the ground for the rest of your life. Like, you're gonna have to move forward with your life and be who God has called you to be. And that goes for anybody in any circumstance. If you are imprisoned right now because of something heinous that you've done, that's not what defines you. You're gonna have to keep moving forward. You got 20 years in prison, you don't get to just hang your head low in prison and say, man, I suck. I did this terrible thing. No, you become who God wants you to be in those walls, and you make the most of it. So I highly suggest being vulnerable. I highly suggest being transparent. Now, talk to your therapist and your close circle about what you're divulging and what you're telling, because, it's not like you need to be telling. Yeah, it's not like I need to, babe, I need to tell you I had a weird thought. Like, okay, chill out, bro. Now you're gonna stress her out, telling her every weird thing that pops into your brain. That's not helpful for anybody. Get you some better friends. You have that talk with your friends. But things that that you've done or are doing that would be hurtful, yeah, man, come clean.